But at the end of the day, if you can't finance a property,
Hmm.
and if that financing is expensive, well, that affects demand,
Yes.
more than anything else, really. Even if you've got the best location in the world, you can't get the financing, and the debt doesn't make any sense, and it doesn't matter.
Yeah, you get cash buyers are the only ones buying stuff at that point, and they're buying them for, a song because they're the only here, I'm the only guy. Here's
And
my
there's been a
offer.
lot of that. There's
Yeah.
been a lot of cash buyers. I mean, that's been 40, 50, if not 60% of the market over the last couple of years. I mean, there's just so much wealth that's been created over the last couple of years. It's that huge disparity between,
Yes.
people that don't have any money and people that have a lot of money. It's really interesting time. And that's a lot of the polarization we're seeing in the country right now because of that wealth disparity.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Probate House Guy podcast. I'm Brad Woodall, the Probate House Guy. Today we're getting back into our real estate investor episodes, and today I've got a guest, Greg Dickerson. I've known him for a number of years. Greg is a great guy and a veteran in the real estate investing industry for sure. So appreciate you coming on the show, Greg. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. Hey, Brad. Good to see you. Thanks for having me. Yeah. So, long story short, I started my entrepreneurial journey full time in 1997 when I moved to the Outer Banks. I'm a serial entrepreneur, real estate investor, and developer. I bought, developed, and sold, several $100 million in real estate using my own money, no investors. Started a dozen different companies from the ground up, and but some ground up, some acquisitions, built them up, scaled them, sold them off, and reinvested all the profits into real estate. So, that's my long story short. I didn't go to college. I went in the Navy right out of high school. After I got out of the Navy, I did, a number of different things, but, always had a little side business while I was working some jobs. But like I said, my full-time entrepreneurial journey started in 1997 when I moved to the Outer Banks of North Carolina, which I know you guys visit there often.
Yes.
Started a little remodeling handyman company, just me, my truck and tools, doing, little odd jobs, $50 here, $100 there. Now, I think my first project might have been $500 or something. And anyways, my first year I did 250,000 in sales. 7 years later, we were doing 30 million a year. We were one of the largest builder developers in the area. I built that and scaled it from 0 to 30 million in 7 years. I, started and bought 12 other companies along the way, scaled those up, sold them off. Started investing in land. That's where my first deal was. It was a lot flip. And I started building spec houses, and I started, doing land development and commercial and multifamily and industrial, and just kind of scaled from there. And, like I said, it culminated into, several $100 million using my own funds, and then hundreds of millions, doing joint ventures and investor deals, and, hundreds of millions in equity capital, buying, building, scaling, exiting companies, things like that. So, that's my long story short.
For sure. Yeah. And when you get into the bigger numbers and the commercial deals, it's really just I was having this discussion with someone the other day. It's just like a few more zeros on the transaction, but you got to kind of bring in some capital sometimes because when you get into these millions and tens of millions, sometimes you run out of your own money a little quick if you're real estate rich and cash poor, right?
Yeah,
And
big deals are easier to do. They're easier to finance, but you've got to have experience, liquidity, net worth. You got to have one of those three things, right? So you don't have to have all those three. That's where you can kind of surround yourself with partners. And, some of my first, really big deals I did do as joint ventures where I brought in, net worth partners
Mhm.
to come in. I was the builder. So, I was a general contractor my whole career, pivoting from a remodeling handyman company to a residential house builder. I was building $1 million, multi-million-dollar beach houses down on the Outer Banks. So I had cash flow, I had a good business, and I was building my credit, my net worth to where I was bankable. But my first big deal, there was actually a probate deal, an estate property that we can talk about later. I know
Yeah.
that's your thing. Some of my best deals have been probate deals. Well, I didn't even call them probate; they were just estate properties, right?
Yes.
So those were some of my best deals, not by targeting probate or anything like that. It just happened to be they were
Sure.
estate deals. So
Yep.
I've had a couple of interesting ones, but anyways, yeah, you got to surround yourself. So you need deals, you need expertise, and you need the financial, qualifications in terms of the debt, equity, things like that. You've got to have those three things to get deals done, small or large, but you don't have to have all three. You can have one of those,
Sure.
then you can fill the gaps with the others. So yeah,
Definitely.
yeah, but
Yeah.
big
When
deals are
I
much easier to do, than little deals.
Yeah, and you're doing legwork on everything, right? Like, I mean, you gotta find the deal, evaluate the deal, do your due diligence, and then figure out the money to raise the money, whether you're raising money to buy a single family house or you're raising money to buy a, multi-million-dollar property, and then managing the deal after that. I mean, it's all the same kind of core components of anything.
And that works with any business model. So, right, you have two choices, right? You can be high ticket, low volume, or you can be low volume, high ticket, right? Or you can be high volume, high ticket too.
Right.
But, at the end of the day, do you want to sell widgets that you're making 10 cents a piece on, or do you want to sell widgets you're making $1,000 a piece or $100,000 a piece or, $1 million a piece? So you want to think of those things. And, like I said, I didn't go to college, but I was very fortunate. Understood the value of self-education. So I'm very highly
Yes.
self-educated. And I learned early on, two things. Number one, I don't know what I don't know. And, all I know is what I know. And number two, I learned that I wanted to be the high ticket guy, right? So I went after, in my market, the high ticket stuff. I started going after oceanfront. I started building multi-million-dollar, houses and spec houses where you're making $300,000 to $600,000 a deal versus, 50 or 100, or even 20, those types of things. And I started looking at how can I make the most amount of money in the least amount of time with the least amount of energy and effort possible. So
Mm-hmm.
I always massage my business models to those things. And then talking about the one of three things as I went along, I didn't have any of it, right? So I had to get the expertise. When I started building, $1 million beach houses, I'd never built a house before, really in my life other than, little small spec houses. So what did I do? I surrounded myself. I hired the experts that's what they had done their whole career, built the types of houses on the Outer Banks that I wanted to build. I
Yep.
hired them, brought them in to, build a company with me and to do these projects. And same thing as I moved into commercial and moved into all these other things, I hired experts and brought experts in to do the projects, for me and with me. But not only that, I learned from them. I asked questions. I said, hey, I don't know what I'm doing. This is the first time I've ever done this. Tell me
Yep.
why you're, doing that. What do these grade stakes mean? What do the marks on the grade stakes mean? Why are we doing this, that, and the other? What's a chord, this, that, and yeah, I mean, I would just ask questions and just say, look, I don't know anything. Teach me. And that's how
Yep.
I learned in remodeling, building all the way up to this day. I still can't frame a house. That's just, that's not the highest use and best use of my
Sure.
time, but I know how it works. I know how the parts go together. But
Yep.
you asked me to, cut in a set of stairs or cut rafters. I mean, I don't know how to do that.
Right. Right. Yeah. And I did the same thing with I did my first development deal a couple years ago. I did a video about it, and I didn't know what I didn't know. So I brought in a partner. I had a buddy locally who had done development deals. And I said, hey, I got this deal on my plate. It's a great deal. I'm going to bring you in as a partner. I'm going to give you a piece of this pie, but I really just need you here to be like my consultant. I'm going to try to do this all on my own, but I need you there to like back me up when I'm unsure about how to do something or I might need some resources. And I got through it and I, took the lion's share of that profit. He got a little bit of piece of the pie, but I learned so much about dividing land and the surveys and the soil tests and all the stuff and going through, the entitlements in the county and all that. I mean, it was a longer process. Development's a longer life cycle than like flipping a house or whatever, right? But just now I know how to do that. So now when the next one comes along, I could probably do that on my own. I might have to bring in some money partners depending on the size of the deal, but I know the mechanics of it now and could do the next one by myself.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, depending on what it is, if it's
yep.
the same thing, but if you get into where it's a different type of use or building or whatever, there's
Yes.
some nuances. But yeah, that's what I tell a lot of people. The best way to get started in development is number one, educate yourself. Two, partner with, hire, or go to work for somebody who has the expertise and learn. And then, then you can start doing stuff on your own. Of course, I have courses, that teach people real estate development, online courses.
Mm-hmm.
And then, mentorship. I coach a lot of people all around the country doing development. So, take the courses, hire mentors, coaches, or find somebody to partner with, in
Yep.
your market, to do the deal with you, another developer. And, a lot of developers in the market will do that. I did that early on in my career. I found other developers that, I would find the deal, line it all up. I did all the work and, they came in with the expertise and
Yeah.
sometimes net worth and liquidity requirements. And I took care of everything else. And they kind of coached me through, some of the things. So, that's how I started investing. I was working for guys that were buying beach houses, renovating them. They'd go in, close in the ground floor underneath, put a pool in,
Yep.
add a bunch of value, increase the income, and they'd flip them. So I learned from those guys that, And then I started, doing spec houses for other guys that were, investors. They were hiring me to build them a spec house and they would sell it. So then I
Yep.
started doing my own, and then, land development, and just on and on and on.
So when you did that with the spec houses, did you just straight sell it to them, or did you ask for a piece of the pie, like to be a part of that kind of the upside of that, or how did you structure that when you did?
Well, at first I was just building for them. They would hire me as a general contractor. And,
Yep.
so I started doing it for them. And then the way I got started was I said, okay, I want to do this. So I found the lots, put everything together, got them under contract. And the deal was supposed to be, I did all the work, they put up all the money
Mm-hmm.
and, got the loans, and we were going to split the profits 50-50. That's the way
Yep.
it was supposed to work. But the first lesson I learned was, I partnered with the wrong guy. He was a developer and he was teaching me the business.
Yep.
And I went and tied up a bunch of lots, and we started building all these houses, and we didn't have anything in writing. It was just a handshake. This guy was, my wife's best friend in college. That, she was maid of honor, and, in her wedding, it was her
Yeah.
husband. So I thought I could
Uh-huh.
trust the guy.
Sure.
And, he took me to the cleaner. So we didn't have an agreement in writing. So it was supposed to be, I'm the builder. He was supposed to bring all the money. The first thing that happened was when I made the phone call saying, hey, we need the working capital deposit. He said, oh, well, I can't just move, $100,000 around, you got to give me time. So I ended up starting the projects and funding the startup of the projects. Next thing you know, I'm signing on the loans with him. He was supposed to be the money. He was supposed to be the loan guarantor, but he
Uh-huh.
didn't have enough, to qualify on his own. So I had to sign the loans with him.
Oh
And
gosh.
then our deal was we were going to sell the houses when they were finished. Now, here's where it gets interesting. We were going to sell the houses when we finish, because at the time I was trying to build my capital and I wanted to
Sure.
sell. And then he
Yeah.
started talking about, well, why don't we hold them for a year and pay long-term gains? And I'm like, I need the cash now. Like,
Right.
I've got my money tied up in this. You were
Yes.
supposed to do that. I
Yes.
need to get the money out. And, I wanted to build a little cash pile. So what he ended up doing was he ended up refinancing the houses and pocketing the cash equity from the
Uh-huh.
build side. And he didn't even tell me.
Oh
Like,
my God.
like he falsified the documents. Like,
Wow.
I was on the loan. He went and paid the loan off,
Uh-huh.
refinanced without my signature,
Yeah.
and pulled all the equity out of the houses. So I ended up having to sue him. Then I ended up settling for about a quarter of what those houses were worth. And,
Gosh.
he kept them, pulled his equity out, and did that whole thing, and just totally cheated me. So that's the structure that was supposed to be when we first
Sure.
started out. But,
Yeah.
I learned a lot of valuable lessons during that process.
Sure.
And, I did make some money and I got some good experience, and I was off to the races after that. And any
Yeah.
deal I did after that, usually it would be somebody else would put up all the money. I did everything else. We had ironclad written documents, and I
Right.
didn't put a nickel into anything. I
Yeah.
made sure, they performed and, did their thing. But the key is have everything in writing, before you do anything.
Yes.
And, that kind of keeps everybody accountable.
Yeah, for sure. I've talked about that. Actually, the development deal I did with my friend at the very end, when we were selling off the last lot, there was some misunderstanding about profit splits on that last lot. So we went back to our original agreement that we had written 18 months prior, and we had spelled it all out. And he's like, oh, yep, you know what? You're right. I guess somehow in my head, I got it. I misunderstood, but here it is in writing.
Yeah,
Cool. We're
everybody
good.
remembers differently. Everybody,
Yeah.
yeah, you just never know. So if you just have it all out front, everything, who's going to do what, how the splits are going to work, the whole 9 yards,
Yep.
and go to a good attorney that does real estate development, joint venture structures, because they're going to have all of the things that normal people wouldn't, most people
Right.
aren't going to think about, right?
Sure.
Especially when it comes to development. There's a lot of things that can happen along the way. But if you've got it all in writing up front, that solves any issues on the back end. And people can still do things and cheat and do all that, but then you can hold them accountable. The problem was when I went to sue this partner, I called a friend of mine who was an attorney, and he's like, I don't know, I think it was I think we had about 250, $300,000 in equity. Maybe, no, it was $500,000 in equity in the deals.
Uh-huh.
My share would have been 250,000. He said, by the time you end up going to court, you're going to end up with about 100 grand anyways. He
Right.
said, legal fees, this, that, and the other, it's going to take you a couple of years. And I ended up settling with him for like 125,000 when, it should have been 250, 300,000.
Yeah. And you wonder if he's probably done that to other people too.
Oh yeah. Well, that was the thing. So the other red flag that I ignored was him telling stories about all of the deals that had gone south where he was doing deals and people that he was partners, he was involved in lawsuits and,
Oh my
all these
gosh.
different things. And I should have just, in our other friend circle, they always said, there's something not quite right about this guy, the way he does business. He just seems kind of shady.
Yeah, yeah.
But, I don't know, he was always nice with me and, it seemed like he knew what he was doing. Well, he did know what he was doing, but yeah, he just had
He was just
no
a snake.
morals and
Yeah.
he was just in it for himself and he always ended up in lawsuits with all his partners.
And there's a sad part is there's like there's a lot of people out there, especially I mean, really an industry. There's charlatans everywhere, and there's guys that I mean, some of them know what they're doing, but they're also good at conning people. And I've seen people I know get caught up in that. Fortunately for me, like I was a fraud investigator in corporate America before I got into real estate. So like I feel like I've got a pretty good gauge of like red flags because I put people in jail for a living that were committing massive white collar crimes, you know? So, but you got to kind of always be on the lookout. And like you said, the best way to do it, just have everything in writing, period.
Yeah, yeah. And I ignored a lot of the warning signs. Like, I listened to all the stories about his partnerships that went south and, he drank a lot, and I kind of was like, but I wanted to get deals going. I wanted to have
Sure.
fun. And I kind of idolized him because he was doing all these development deals
Yes.
and all that. And, and we got along. We took ski trips together and family vacations
Sure.
together and all that. So I just kind of overlooked the other stuff and trusted him. And, I was young. It was my first experience. And, like I
Yeah.
said, I learned a ton. So, I don't have any regrets. And, looking back on it, he taught me a ton. And, from that point on, like I said, I was in control of the deals. I made sure that that couldn't happen anymore. And I never had any issues with partners, ever after that. And, the only issues I've only been to court twice. I sued people both times. It was specific performance on
Yep.
some deals that I did. One of them was an estate property, a probate deal,
Okay.
if you want to start getting into probate or whatever. But yeah,
Yeah.
all the deals, everything I did, all the stuff, nobody ever sued me. I never had any legal issues. I was the one that sued other people that didn't keep their end of the deals, but they were sellers. They
Yeah. Yeah.
weren't partners. Well, one
Right.
of them was supposed to be sort of a partnership, um, but yeah, and I won both times, hands down.
Yeah, those are interesting. I have never gotten to the point where we actually like had a specific performance suit, but I have sent a demand letter to sellers that have, you know, tried to screw me over intentionally. Like
Yeah.
there's a fine line between that because some people like we dealt with this on a deal recently that we closed I guess about a month ago. And this person had gone under contract with another wholesaler, and that wholesaler had clouded the title with a memorandum of contract and whatever. But really, at the end of the day, when you find the whole story, she sent us copies of all the email communications she had with this guy and the text messages, and he was misrepresenting himself, and in his conversations with her was not professional at all in the slightest bit. So we brought all that. We ended up having to get an attorney involved with this, and we ended up getting kind of past that around that. But I feel bad for the lady because she basically was like stuck for an entire year because of this unscrupulous investor that was trying to like play hardball. When at the end of the day, like in that situation, I would have let her out of the deal. You know, I've done that to sellers before where I analyze a situation, and if there's certain circumstances, I'll let them out of the deal. But if I can tell that they're just blatantly being dishonest and trying to snake me, then yeah, I will put my hammer down and say no. And I've sent demand letters and I've gotten paid out on deals that, you know, they blatantly were trying to go around me. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, these were both of these were oceanfront hotels that I was going to tear down, redevelop the property.
mhm.
So there was a hurricane on the Outer Banks, 2001. It was Hurricane Isabel. That was the most
Yep,
damaging hurricane we
it
saw on the
was.
Outer Banks. And this hotel had gotten damaged. And this is really interesting. I just gotten my real estate license as a broker
Uh-huh.
back in like 2000, 2001. And I took a lot. Well, so okay, here's how it happened. The hurricane comes, destroys the hotel. The owner of the hotel passed away, so the family had the hotel and they wanted to get rid of it. They didn't want to run it, another season without the
Sure.
the patriarch. So it was an estate property.
Yep.
So I can't even remember. Oh, it was a friend of mine that knew the owners and brought the opportunity to me. So this was a joint venture deal where I had two other partners in it. And it was a $4 million acquisition, had 6 oceanfront lots, 2 across the street. So we put the property under contract with the sellers. And then at the same time, I put my signs on there. There was a guy next door that owned a house, and he had an oceanfront lot between the hotel and the house. And he
Mm-hmm.
calls me up and says, "Hey, I see you're buying the hotel next door. Would you like to buy my lot?" And I said, "Sure." I just paid, I can't remember what it was, $4 million for 6, whatever, worked out to like 4 or $500,000 a lot, something like, or
Yeah.
600,000 per lot. I said, "That's what I'm buying here. I can pay you 600,000." He said, "I don't want 600,000. I want 800,000." And I said, "Well, nothing is sold for that much in Nags Head on the ocean." And
Yeah.
at the time it hadn't, but this was again 2001. So the market was just starting to, heat up
It
and
was
ramp
there.
up. And I said, "Well, I just got my real estate license. I can list it for you." And he
Yeah.
said, "Okay." So I put it on the market at like 850,000, something like that. Within a month or a couple of weeks, we had it under contract at 850,000. That's the highest oceanfront sale at the time. Nothing else had closed at that price in that area.
Yeah.
And my first commission right out of the gate as a real estate broker was $30,000.
There you
And
go.
yeah, you would have thought the light bulb would have went off, and I'd said, "Man, let's go do this."
Yeah.
But back then that was a lot of money, right? And
Sure.
my first commission check is really funny. So, anyways, so the
Yeah.
market was heating up. The
Yes.
sellers saw that transaction. The owner, little
Uh-huh.
old lady, and her sons, and that were kind of behind the scenes. Well, turns out they had sold property to Walmart back where they're from, so they knew what they were doing. But they played
Right.
the little old lady card, right? So
Uh-huh.
they tried to get out of the deal and tried to not close when it came time to close on the transaction. So
Sure.
I filed what's called a lis pendens lawsuit pending, to
Correct.
kind of cloud the title. Ended
Uh-huh.
up ended up going to court. It took 2 years to get it to court. I spent $125,000, $150,000 on legal fees, but 2 years later they had to sell us the property. They lost, hands down. But yeah, they brought the little old lady into court, put her on the stand. She talked about her husband passed away, this, that, and the other.
Mm-hmm.
Everything was like, but it is what it is, right? We had a contract to purchase.
Right.
Um,
You did
they
everything you were going to do.
Right. So usually in most states, you can make somebody sell, but you can't make somebody buy. There's
Yep.
usually a penalty if you don't close if you're a buyer, but if you don't
Sure.
close as a seller, you have to fulfill your obligation. And really, at the end of the day, I was buying the property for 600,000 a lot. They saw that lot sell for 800,000, so they wanted more money.
Sure.
And they had another builder that was willing to pay them, I don't know, a million or two more than what I was going to pay them. So
Yep.
from their standpoint, it was just a business deal, right? Business
Sure.
decision. They're like, "Hey, let's
Yep.
not close. Let's drag this out. Maybe he'll pass away. Maybe he'll give up. Whatever. We could win. At the end of the day, we're still going to get $4 million, but there's a chance that we could get 6, and we're going to have to spend a couple $100,000, in legal fees along the way."
Right.
They went through 4 attorneys because each time an attorney would pick this thing up, they would drop it because they're like, "You're not going to win. It's
Yeah.
ironclad." We had an
Right.
ironclad contract. There was just no way
Yeah.
that they could get out of it. But they ended up finding this one attorney who just, tried to play the smoke and mirrors game. The court case took a week. It was just ridiculous how long it took because of all
Yeah.
the smoke and mirrors he tried to bring up, for why they didn't have to close. I don't know. At the end of the day, the
Sure.
jury was out like 30 minutes,
Yeah.
and they came back and they're like, hands down, we had it won. But yeah, they put her on the stand and tried to make her look like we were taking advantage of this little old lady. And turns out, she sold property to Walmart, and that all came out. Their own
Oh.
attorney asked her, like, "You've sold property to Walmart. You know what you're doing, right?" She's like,
Sure.
"Yes." It's just like,
It's like, okay.
yeah, yeah. It's like
Yeah.
she knew
You're not
exactly
the
what she was
innocent old
doing.
lady.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they had this attorney that was out of state and he didn't know the laws in North Carolina. And, he was trying to control things and he was, he wasn't a good witness. He was really just a cantankerous attorney and really mean and
Yeah.
argumentative, but
Sure.
anyways, still took a week. So the second
Wow.
one was a joint venture deal. So we ended up closing on that and, built the houses, sold the lots. I mean, that deal ended up making a lot of money for us and it was
Yeah.
really, really good. And then the next one I did, this was an owner, again, another hurricane destroyed property. He had
Mm-hmm.
come to me after the hurricane destroyed it and say, "Hey, I want to convert this into condos." It was an
Mm-hmm.
old hotel next to a fishing pier in Kill Devil Hills. He said, "I
Yep.
want to convert this into condos." And I said,
Know
"Well, you
exactly which
can't."
one.
The Camas, yeah, the Tanorama, the old Tanorama Hotel.
Mm-hmm.
The Camas setbacks would not allow you to do that, because when you're a commercial property, you have to double the Camas setback, and
Uh-huh.
that ate up all the property. These lots were only like 100 feet deep or something.
Yeah.
And I said, "You're not going to be able to do that." And he said, "Well, I've got somebody that says we can do it and we can kind of do this and that and skirt it under the radar." I'm like, "No, you can't do that. You're going to get, you're going to get caught. You try to renovate this thing into condos without a
Right.
building permit.
Good luck with that.
Right. So he did it, and this partner convinced him, and they'd sunk like $250,000 into this thing, and they finally got caught by the building department and had a stop work order put on them, and then they ended up in a lawsuit.
Yep.
And so, long story short, this guy, out of the blue, like 2, 3 years after I talked to him, comes walking in my office, and he said, I'm ready to do your deal. My deal was, hey, let's tear down the hotel, build 4 houses across the street. We've got two, or on the ocean, we've got 2 lots across the street we can
Yeah.
do whatever with, build
Mhm.
townhouses. I think I was going to do townhouses at the time.
Uh-huh.
Now, this was 2008
Okay.
when he walked into my office. It was right around 2008, just before the crash, right?
Yep.
So he walks in my office. He said, I'm ready to do the deal. I said, okay. The deal was we're going to tear the hotel down. I'm doing everything. He owned the land outright. We're going to tear the Oceanfront Hotel down. I'm going to build 4 houses there. We'll sell them. And then I'm going to build, I think it was 8 townhouses across the street on the property across the street. We'll get those built. We'll own them free and clear. We
Yep.
can keep them. We can sell them. We can do whatever.
Right.
And, so he was putting in the land. I was doing all the work, and I was going to borrow the money.
Yep.
So when I was working with my lender, facilitating the loan and putting everything together, he was like, we were talking about the market. He was like, yeah, there's something kind of weird going on. He's like, why don't you just sell the property across the street instead of taking the risk on building? You'll be free and clear. You'll have the cash, and then you've got the piece across the street free and clear, and then you can build on those. And I'm like, you know
Yeah.
what? That makes a lot of sense. And sure enough, so we did that. Put the hotel up for sale. I tore it down, put it up for sale. We sold it, made, I settled his lawsuit that he had with this other guy,
Okay.
got rid of that, settled that disagreement. I tear the hotel down, take care of everything. And we go to start developing the lot across the street. And this guy comes to me and says, I'm not doing the deal across the street with you. He said, you've made enough money on this other deal just because we didn't build it. We sold it, but I brought the buyer. I
Yeah.
tore everything down. I created all the value. But he's
Sure.
like, you didn't build the houses. You made too much money just selling the lots.
Too much money.
I'm doing the deal across the street by myself. And I'm like, well, you can't do that. We have a contract. He
Right.
said, he looks at me, he goes, sue me. I said, okay.
Okay.
So
Sure.
called my attorney that did the other deal.
Yep.
I said, hey, I got another situation. I sent him everything. He calls me back. He says, you want to do a contingency deal? I'm like, yes. Meaning I didn't have to pay any legal fees. He was going
Yeah.
to take his cut out of the deal. The first
Yeah.
time I had to pay all the legal fees, and he knew, how I operated. And he's like, this is a slam dunk. And that would actually, we went to court for the first time. The judge looked at it and he's like, you guys go out here and settle this. You're not going to win, Mr. Seller, go settle
Right.
this thing. So we went outside and we settled, and, he paid me out of the property and I let him keep the property. He wanted to keep it. And,
Yeah.
it was really funny, but yeah, won that
Wow.
one again, hands down.
Yeah. Well, that, and so you're talking about 2008. You've been through a cycle, and you were talking about, I mean, I've been going to the Outer Banks my entire
So
life.
after that deal closed, the market fell apart.
It
All of
did.
that, the oceanfront lot sold, everything happened and went down, and then the market fell off a cliff, like literally after that deal closed.
I remember in 2006, we started staying on Duck Landing Lane in 2001, which is when a lot of those houses were being built. 2001, 2002, 2003.
Yeah, I was building a bunch of them in Duck. Yeah.
Yeah. So we started staying on that street, and there was a house. My whole family goes, like, we get 2 houses. We have that many. There's like 30 people that go to the Outer Banks every summer, right? And we were going to buy a house on Duck Landing Lane that was for sale at the time for, it was either 1-2 or 1-3. And the family was going to go in together and buy it. We had met with a broker, and like, we were going to do this. And then something happened, and then we didn't. And then that same house was for sale a few years later when we came back for $600,000, half of what it was for sale for that we almost bought. Good thing we didn't buy it. Sometimes the best deals you do, you never do, right?
Yeah, we saw that. Literally, values got cut, in half or more, in some areas on the Outer Banks, and then stayed that way for a long time. It took a lot of years for that market to come back. But then since the pandemic, it's been red hot. I mean, inventory went down to almost nothing. Values have doubled, in a lot of areas, and it's just been nuts what property's been selling for. But that's starting to correct now. We're starting to see, more listings stack up. We're starting to see, major price reductions. Still above, prices are still above pre-pandemic levels, but
Yes.
and and this is happening across the country in a lot of
It
markets. We're
is.
starting to see the real estate market come back and correct, and inventory,
Yeah.
starting to stack up a little bit, and things like that. But yeah, the housing market since 2020 has just been nuts. We've never seen anything like it. I mean, it's way hotter than it was 0405 before the run up.
Yeah, and we've been in this like slow correction since interest rates went up. I think it was because it was so hot that it took a while to lose that steam, like when interest rates, shot up, because that was the fastest that mortgage rates had gone up in that short a period of time, like ever in history. They haven't jumped that much in that short amount of time, like
Yeah,
ever.
that's what drove values was low interest rates, right? We're 2-3% interest. I mean,
Oh
so
yeah.
you can pay twice as much, for a
Yep.
house because, your payments were the same. But what drove it was the lack of inventory,
Yes.
so during the pandemic, everything got shut down, builders weren't building, you couldn't get things, supply chain was shut down. So that really, constricted the inventory. And then the work from home
Hmm.
environment became permanent. And that
Yep.
really affected because a lot of people, just they didn't want to move. They didn't want to sell their house because they didn't have to.
Right.
So, we just saw inventory continue to reduce. We all thought, that things would correct a little bit quicker with interest rates going up. But the problem is so many people got locked into, those low interest loans. They're healthy
Yes.
borrowers. They're at 2-3%. you know, I mean, there's no reason for them to sell that house with that kind of a mortgage, but also wherever they're wanting to go, there's nothing for sale where they want to go.
No.
And, so, I mean, that's the biggest issue right now because every seller is a buyer,
Yep.
or a renter. And, when there's no inventory out there for rent or to buy, there's nowhere for sellers to go. So they're like, you know what, we'll just stay here. But we're starting to get to the point now where some of that's loosening up because there are, interest only loans. We're seeing the Fed start to talk about rate cuts,
Yes.
maybe towards the end of the year. So there is some hope that mortgage rates, will continue to come down a little bit, even though mortgage rates are based on the Treasury, the 10-year note specifically, which is coming down because of Fed funds policy. The
Yes.
Fed's lower
Yes.
rates, bonds will reprice and rates will come down a little bit, which affects mortgage rates. So we're starting to see that correct a little bit.
Yeah.
We're seeing builders that have a lot of inventory offering, buy downs and things like that, buying
Yes.
down the interest rate and,
Hmm.
doing sales and things like that. So we're starting to see it loosen up again. And yeah, but we still have, constricted inventory in a lot of markets. It's still a problem in a lot of areas.
It's the laws of supply and demand. I mean, you can't break the laws of supply and demand. Whenever there's a supply and demand imbalance, it has to work itself out before things will change. Now, other factors can affect that, but at the end of the day, it's just supply and demand. You've got very low supply, and you've got, even though it's probably not super high demand now, but you still have demand for that low supply. So, that's just how it's going to go.
Yeah,
It's
in hot markets where there's a lot of demand, yeah, houses are still selling in days. They're still getting multiple
Yes.
offers. It's not as crazy as it was, but
No.
you're still seeing it. And then there's
Yep.
markets where, inventory's stacking up, price reductions, houses aren't moving, days on market's going up. So you're seeing that happen in some markets, but yeah, it's really interesting. It takes time. The housing market is a very slow moving train, although we did see it fall off a cliff in 0809 because financing dried up.
Yes.
Values were correcting so fast, but the bottom line was people couldn't get a loan.
No.
I mean, that was that, it's all driven by liquidity, right? So it's debt
Sure.
and the cost of the debt is what drives values in real estate, commercial or residential, on top of demand, right? So demand,
Right.
location, all that can, that can make a big difference both ways, a premium
Right.
or a discount. But at the end of the day, if you can't finance a property,
Hmm.
and if that financing is expensive, well, that affects demand, more
Yes.
more than anything else, really. Even if you've got the best location in the world, if you can't get the financing and the debt doesn't make any sense, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, you get cash buyers are the only ones buying stuff at that point, and they're buying them for, a song because they're the only here. I'm the only guy. Here's
And
my
there's been a
offer.
lot of that. There's
Yeah.
been a lot of cash buyers. I mean, that's been 40, 50, if not 60% of the market over the last couple of years. I mean, there's just so much wealth that's been created over the last couple of years. It's that huge disparity between,
Yes.
people that don't have any money and people that have a lot of money. It's really interesting time. And that's a lot of the polarization we're seeing in the country right now because of that wealth disparity.
Sure. Sure. And there's a unique situation now compared to 06, 07, 08, whereas a lot of people, and I heard this stat a few months ago, that even the people that are in default right now on their loans, which defaults are going up slowly. Um, they have at least, I think it was like 90% of them have at least 10% equity in their property right now that are in default on their foreclosure. So they have enough equity where they can sell these houses before the foreclosure auction and still take a little bit of a haircut and either break even or maybe walk away with a little bit of money.
Well, the other thing too, so you've got that, and the other thing that we did not have 0809 was forbearance. So the
Yeah,
lenders were foreclosing. They were not
correct.
allowing initially short sales. They weren't allowing any kind of, loan modifications or anything like that. The pandemic created a new paradigm in the lending in the mortgage industry where, all you got to do now is call your lender and say, "Hey, I can't make the payments." And they will rework your loan. They'll extend the term. They'll
Yep,
put your payments on the back end. They'll give you 6 months. Now you might have to show a little distress to get, payment vacation,
sure.
but you can get 6 months to a year of no payments added onto the back of the loan.
Yep,
Those types of things. Lenders were not doing that stuff in 0809. They were just foreclosing at scale just to
yes,
get those toxic assets off their books.
correct.
That's what destroyed people, families, businesses. I mean, it's ridiculous, that they could not get that through their minds back then. Look, the way to stop this is just to work this stuff out, just
Right.
like we did in the pandemic.
Yes.
So anybody watching, whatever your situation is, if you're behind on your car payments, credit card bills, mortgage, whatever, there's forbearance and there's workouts available to you. All you got to do
Yes.
is call them. They're most of the time they're not even asking for income verification, job verification. You just tell them, look, I can't make my payments right now. Can you give me X amount of time and put these on the back of the loan,
Yep.
whether it's a car, credit card, house, whatever. 9 times out of 10, they'll just do it right there on the phone.
Right.
Sometimes they're going to ask you to prove,
Sure.
that you don't have the funds and resources and things like that. So that's very different than anything we've seen in the past. We saw it a little bit in the commercial market.
Uh-huh.
And there's more, what they call extend and pretend in the commercial markets right now. I mean,
Yes.
there's $1 trillion worth of debt coming due in the commercial market over the next few years
Right.
that is underwater. Even at current rates, even if the Fed cuts rates, they still don't make any sense. And that's kind of what they're doing. They're just kind of working it out on a lot of those assets. Some of them, the banks are just taking them back, wiping out the equity investors and selling them off for, basically either what the loan is or less than what the loan is and just kind of taking the haircut. So there's a lot of damage in the commercial market that is still yet to play out. But the residential market is really healthy in most areas because most of the houses are owned free and clear. The ones
Yep.
that aren't, most of them have, sub 4% loans on
Right.
them. And then
My
a
house.
lot of them still have equity in them,
Right.
just like you just said. So that's what's propping the housing market up.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So I'm interested to see what happens. I mean, fortunately, and this is just I was talking about this morning with somebody about this. We're starting to see the gap between, the 10-year treasury spread between the 10-year treasury and mortgage rates got very high, right? Historically, it runs like 1 to 1.5% above. It got like, was it 2.5 or almost 3% spread? So even if the 10-year treasury stays the same right now, I think a lot of investors the investors that buy notes and secondary markets and all that stuff are starting to see the economic data look favorable. So they're like, okay, well, let's drop this spread. So the rates are going to, mortgage rates will go down. I think, and this is just purely my opinion, I think the magic number is in the fives. When the rates get into the fives, which is only like basically 100 basis points of, where we're at right now, right? We're in the high sixes right now. You'll start to see people start to think about maybe selling. Maybe people that are in the fours, they're like, well, I've got a lot of equity in my house. I could just put a lot down on the new house, buy a more expensive house, keep the same payment. Yeah, I'm going from a 4.25 to a 5, or maybe you buy it down. And then you also see the people that are in the sevens and the sixes refinancing into fives. And then I think that'll give it a little bit of a boost. It's still very frothy, and different price points are unique now. I'm trying to stay under 400K on our flips, 400K ARV. All those are always selling, predominantly FHA buyers in those price points. So that's still moving, but it is slower than it was. But it's also area dependent, heavily area dependent too.
Yeah, it is. It is. Like in my market, anything up to 1 million that's decent generally will sell, quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And there isn't anything really under 400,000, in most areas. So Yeah,
Yeah.
it really depends. It's very, real estate's hyper local. Every market's different, but that's the key. If you're in the business and you're flipping and you're doing things, you want to find the sweet spot, where stuff is selling, where that demand is. And yeah, I mean, the 10-year, I was looking at it while you were talking. I mean, it's at 4% today.
Is it?
Looks like
Okay.
it's headed down. If the Fed is, continuing to cut rates,
Yep.
the yields on the bonds will continue to be down, which is what the spread, like you said, is based on. So yeah, we could see mortgage rates, back down around 5%,
And that's a good
maybe.
healthy rate. Like fives is a good healthy number for mortgage rates. Like,
Well, it's funny. That used to be cheap, right?
yeah,
So
yeah. Right.
back when I got started, rates were 9, 10%. And I
Sure.
remember when they dropped, that's what kind of spurred the market in the 2000s.
Yep.
When I bought my first house that I lived in 1990, that's when I bought my first home. We had to buy on a 3-2-1 buy down. I was talking about buying down mortgage rates earlier. So
Mm-hmm.
what that meant was, the first year, so rates were like 9.75% at the time for a 30-year fixed rate mortgage.
Yeah.
So the builder paid to buy our rate down to where the first year it was 6.75, second year was 7.75, third year it went to 8.75, the fourth year it reset at 9.75. The thinking was we were young, we were in our 20s. I was like 23 at the time.
Sure.
Was that you're going to make more money so you can afford more payment
Yeah.
every year, and or the rates will come down, you can refinance.
Yep.
And that was really back then the only way builders could sell houses because there was so much inventory. This was the early 90s. Well, it was 1990.
Yeah.
The real estate market was in trouble, and builders inventory was stacking up. They couldn't sell homes because interest rates had gone up. And then as we went through time, I moved to the Outer Banks in '97. Most of my loans were in the nines.
Mm-hmm.
And then I remember when rates came down to 5, that was huge. And that's what really spurred the market because cash flows were good on rental houses.
Yep.
The real estate market just started going because rates were down around 5. And, I remember, that was kind of a trigger threshold. If rates ever got above 5% into the 6% range or whatever, that was really the threshold for the market. It might have got down into the fours, I think, at one point, and then it went back up into the fives. And then, we saw what happened in 2008, 9. Rates started skyrocketing.
Sure.
Banks were just, going under, and, the market was down. But yeah, 5 is still cheap. But in this economy, from a Fed funds standpoint, from a mortgage rate standpoint, I think that's probably neutral. And
Yep.
that's probably more of a longer term rate that we're going to settle in. You can still get lower rates if the 30-year fix is at 5%, you can still get interest only in the threes.
Right.
Yeah. So there's still ways to mitigate that and get it down. But unfortunately, if rates come down, I think that's just gonna. I don't
The
know.
prices are gonna, yeah, they're good. The prices are good because now all of a sudden your demand's gonna spur back up, and the supplies. I mean, I mean, you've been in construction. We're still in a deficit in new construction. Like, there's a subdivision that they developed across the street from my house. They started at the same time I built my house, and literally just yesterday they just cleared and started staking out foundations on their last 4 lots. They did 48 lots. It was Taylor Morrison Homes. They're out of Phoenix, Arizona. They're a big, national builder, and over the course of 2 years. And these are $700,000 houses, which for our area is like a pretty decent house. They've sold all of them,
Yeah.
every single one of them. They just cleared their last 4 lots. They're going to be done, completely done with that neighborhood.
Yeah, but there are markets, Texas, Florida,
Yes.
Arizona, where, builders can't sell houses and inventory is
Right.
stacking up, so it's really interesting, how these things are going in the different markets. But, there's two lines of thought, and there's, economists and experts that will say that lower interest rates will unlock, inventory because it will,
Mhm.
like you said, it can put people in a position where they can sell.
Yep.
But it also at the same time, will keep prices elevated, it will spur demand because a lot of people are on the sidelines right now with
Correct.
refinances and with purchases because of interest rates. You
Yeah.
start getting down in the fives, that's not only a threshold from affordability, but a mental threshold where people will
Correct.
come back in,
Yes.
snatch up, a lot of that inventory. So, will that really unlock, enough supply, and, what's the demand really going to look like? So it's man, it's really fascinating. But the bottom line is we saw basically 10 years of appreciation in the housing market in a 2 to 3 year period
Yes.
during
Yep.
the pandemic. And
Yeah.
we saw it basically in everything. We saw it in car prices. We saw it in assets. We saw it in, real estate. I mean, you just saw basically 10 years of normal price growth, market growth,
Yeah.
appreciation in all assets in a very short period of time. So we're kind of in that equilibrium catch up phase. So that's been
Yeah.
my thesis has been, over the next 10 years, we were just going to kind of rebalance. Wages will continue to kind of catch up to inflation. Prices aren't coming down on a lot of things. Like, you see that inflation's coming down and, the Fed and all that. We're still, I mean, food hasn't come down. We're still
No,
seeing, you go to
gosh,
the grocery store, you go out
every
to eat,
time.
there's no relief there. Wages
Yep.
haven't come down. Wages are still up. Vehicles haven't really come down.
They're
Vehicles are
coming
just
down.
a
That
little bit.
market's starting to kind of fall off. I've got some buddies in the car business, and they've had their worst. 2024 has been their worst year ever. Like,
Right, but prices are still higher than where they were
yes,
before the
they were
pandemic, which they
correct.
became obnoxious in the pandemic. And the reason
Oh
I
yeah,
know is because, I need to get a new vehicle, but I'm waiting because I'm like, I'm not gonna buy
yep.
anything right now. It's just I drive Suburbans, and it's
Hmm.
just ridiculous how much those, because the demand during the pandemic, people wanted bigger vehicles, they're traveling around,
Sure,
so those things went through the roof. I mean, I drive a 2016. I can drive anything I want, but I
sure.
love Suburbans, and I've got a 2016 I bought brand new in 2016.
Uh-huh.
I paid 58,000 for it.
Yep.
The same vehicle now is like 80, 90 grand. And
I'm
I'm
with you
like,
there. Yeah. I'm still
it,
driving a 10-year-old Toyota Tundra. I've got almost 200,000 miles on it. I kind of really like the new ones, but they're also $75,000
well, it's
for a
not
new
only
car.
that, and they're not as nice. Like I test
Right.
drove a couple of the new Suburbans, and I'm like, mine's nicer than theirs, than the new ones. Like they drive a little better, a little tighter, but
Sure.
I'm just like, I'm not going to pay $100,000 for a vehicle. That's just
Right.
for an everyday vehicle. And I'm not an exotic car guy. I went through that phase. I bought a Hummer H2 when they came out back
Okay.
in
Yeah.
2003 or four. I paid 75,000 for it back then, which would be
Wow.
like 200 grand now.
Sure.
So I went through that whole phase, and I've always had a Suburban. I love them. They're great family cars.
Sure.
Things like that. And I always coached sports and had kids, so we always had a car full of kids. And
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. We have a
you know,
Sequoia for all the
so I'm
kids.
just waiting. The 2025s are going to come out, inventory stacking up, and I'm going to have to pay more than I want to anyways at some point. But yeah, like to your point, I've been watching the car market, and it's correcting, and those large vehicle demand has dropped off, and it's just expensive, man. People just, I
Yep.
mean, the average car payment now is like $700-800 a month or something for
That's
people, and it's just
wild to
nuts.
me. I've never had a car payment over like $500. Like that's like even now. We needed a bigger car earlier this year, so we traded my wife's 4Runner, which we loved her 4Runner. Great vehicle. Love it was our second one we had. Traded in for Sequoia because we needed a little bit bigger vehicle. We got a new baby on the way next week. And I was like doing the math and I was like, okay, I just borrowed a little bit because we had a huge, equity in the other one. It was paid for. So I took a small loan out and I was like, just my mental barrier of like, I can't pay more than $500. So I just did like a 2-year loan on it just to keep the payment. It was like, it was just this weird thing for me to like pay more than $500 a month. And
Yeah, yeah. I always bought vehicles on zero interest, so I
yeah,
just make payments. Your payments are always a little higher because it's either
right.
like 36 or 48 or whatever. But yeah,
Yeah,
never over 1,000 except for the Hummer. The Hummer was a 1,200 or
right.
$1,400 a month payment. And I remember signing up for that, and I was like, man, this is crazy. But actually, that vehicle was not good at all. It had a lot of issues.
They did. They
Yeah,
did. Yeah.
yeah. I didn't
So
like it at all. But it was a nice vehicle, and it was fun for a while. But yeah, it didn't even do as good on the beach as my Suburban does.
You know, people don't realize, the Outer Banks. I know the Outer Banks. The trick to driving on the beach is air down your tires. You can even go without four-wheel drive if you know how to drive on it and you air down your tires. But so many people get stuck out there. They don't air down their tires, and I'm yanking them out left and right. And they're like, how do like just air down your tires, like 20 pounds,
Yeah, yeah. I didn't know that at first. I had to learn it the hard way, but
right? It makes a
you
huge
learn by
difference.
getting stuck.
Right, driving on the sand. So, Greg, I mean, you've got so much experience. You've been through so many market cycles. In your crystal ball, where do you think the best place in the real estate market is for the next 2 or 3 years? Like, what kind of like segment do you think is probably going to be all right for the next 2 or 3 years?
I mean, it's hyper local, so every market's different, but let's just take the different types of markets. So housing, obviously, you want to go where there's a lot of demand. Builders are very hungry for land, so there's a lot of opportunity in land flipping.
Mm-hmm.
In markets where there's no, new inventory, then obviously resales are going to be your best opportunity. So probates, those are the best deals that
Yes.
I've ever gotten, are probate deals. So I know you have programs for people to take advantage of that, and a turnkey marketing service for probate. that is where I would focus if you're in a market where there's not a lot of new inventory, and you have to focus on marketing resales. Those are the hands down the best deals you can get. Um, and land too. A lot of land I've bought have been, estate properties. I just call them estate properties, probate estate, same thing.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
so that's in the residential side. Short-term rentals are still good in the right markets.
The right.
That segment has taken a hit in a lot of
Yes.
areas, but in the right markets, they can still be very good. And there's some tax advantages to short-term rentals. There's a short-term rental loophole where you can
Hmm.
offset passive income and capital gains
Yes.
with losses in short-term rentals as a non-real estate professional that you can't do with other areas.
Hmm.
When it comes to commercial multifamily, multifamily and commercial, a lot of those assets were overpriced because of interest rates. It's taken, that market is starting to correct. There are some distressed deals out there, but multifamily in a lot of markets are still overpriced. It's hard to make the deals work. Um, Commercial can be really good for the right types of assets in the right markets. Think pandemic proof. The
Hmm.
assets that did well during the pandemic, medical, dental, professional, type offices that, could not operate out of their houses did well. Grocery stores, certain, like coffee shops, fast food, inline strip centers did well
Hmm.
because they were still able to operate on a takeout, type of a basis.
Yeah.
So you want to think about those types of assets. Storage is kind of overdone in a lot of markets, a lot of
I think so
competition
too.
heating up. Mobile
Yeah.
home parks, a lot of competition, in certain markets there. And then industrial is still doing well in a lot of markets because the whole online, world, last mile distribution, things like that. But
Yes.
in certain markets, again, a lot of people were chasing those assets, so it's getting overdone. So we're reaching saturation in a lot of areas of commercial real estate as well. So you got to be really careful, make sure that, you're getting good assets in the right markets with good long-term tenants. And at the end of the day, you can pay whatever you want for a property as long as it cash flows
Yeah.
and provides the return you're looking for. And, you may even want to go into a negative cash flow position if it's got redevelopment potential or it's a special kind of property and it just kind of pays itself off over the years. So it's really up to the individual, but we are still at very high levels. So here's my word of caution. We're still at, record high levels in a lot of markets for a lot of assets.
Hmm.
So when you're at these peaks, you could potentially see another little peak, but you've got more risk to the downside than you do to the upside right now. So your risk is to the downside, not to the upside. What do I mean by risk to the upside? Risk to the upside is risking missing out, on potential upside. Right now, that is way, levered towards the downside. So you got to be very careful. Make sure that, yes, the Fed may cut, rates may come down. We're not out of the woods yet.
Hmm.
Inflation has not been tamed. The job market is still hot. So you got to really, really keep an eye on those things and watch those things. And, the geopolitical situation is kind of heating up, so that can, create temporary issues in the markets, but the real estate market's a little bit different. It's going to boil down to supply and demand. So look for positive net demographic growth. You want positive net migration. You want for the assets you're looking for, limited amount of supply, heavy demand, and then try to carve out a niche and create a unique opportunity for yourself, and some sort of competitive advantage in those markets with the types of assets you're looking for. So,
Yeah.
uh, if you're using debt, lock in good long-term debt. Don't
Yes.
bank on rates coming down. They probably might, and they probably will, but they don't always stay down forever like we've seen.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. And you mentioned creating a niche. I think that's huge. And I've always tried to do that in what I do is because I read the book, The Blue Ocean Strategy years ago. Like it's the blue ocean versus the red ocean. Red ocean's where all the sharks are swimming and everybody's there. Try to create a blue ocean with your business. Try to not be around everyone else and maybe you can still do similar things to the other people are doing. But if you create a different spin and a unique perspective and a unique niche on things, you can be successful while the other guys are just swimming with the sharks and chasing the same bait.
Absolutely.
For sure. Well, Greg, we've kind of run out of time today. I know you got things to do. I really appreciate you come. Good. I really appreciate you coming on, man. You're just a wealth of knowledge all the time. You've helped me in my career, done some coaching with me in the past. If someone wants to get a hold of you and then want to work with you, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Yeah, gregdickerson.com. All my information is there. YouTube channel, podcast. Yeah, gregdickerson.com.
Yeah, we'll put all this in the show notes. You do a lot of content regularly on YouTube. You're always pushing out shorts and pushing out long form stuff, and a lot of just on all kinds of different topics. I mean, not just real estate, but investing and just everything, running businesses, managing businesses, all the things. So um definitely check out Greg. If you're not subscribed to his channels and his all of his stuff, go check him out. It's just a wealth of information. Hey Greg, I appreciate you coming on today, man. Thanks again.
Yep. Thanks for having me.
All right. Have a good one. Talk to you
Yeah,
later.
you too.